What happens when the men trained to hold an army together decide they would rather run from it? Because once officers start disappearing, the front line is not just under attack from outside, it is cracking from the inside. If you want clear analysis that cuts through noise, tap like, subscribe, and share this with one person who still thinks armies collapse only when they lose tanks. Most people hear the word desertion and imagine young recruits, scared, cold, badly trained, and desperate to survive. But that is not the most dangerous kind of desertion in a war like this. The more serious signal comes when career officers begin to walk away. These are not men who stumbled into uniform by accident. They chose the institution. They studied its rules. They built their adult lives inside its chain of command. They know how the system talks in public, how it behaves in private, and how it treats people once the slogans fade. When they stop believing, that tells you something deep is breaking. And that is why the recent pattern matters so much. Across open court cases, family complaints, military blogger posts, intercepted calls, prisoner accounts, and reports from Ukrainian intelligence, one picture keeps appearing. This is not just a story of a few bad officers losing their nerve. It looks more like a widening crisis inside the leadership layer of the Russian military. Not everywhere in the same way, not all at once, not enough to say the entire army is about to vanish overnight, but enough to show that a dangerous process is underway. The institution is demanding more from officers than it can justify, more than it can support, and in many cases, more than those officers believe is survivable. That kind of pressure does not always produce public rebellion. More often, it produces quiet exits, paper excuses, missing men, broken chains of command, and commanders who are present in name but absent when the shooting starts. It tells itself a comforting story. We are losing dissidents, not professionals. We are losing the soft men, not the committed ones. That story becomes much harder to believe when the officers leaving are the ones who stayed through the hard years, obeyed orders, rotated through combat, and carried out the missions they were given. The recent concern is not centered on ideological rebels. It is centered on working officers, especially mid-career men, captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels, who know exactly how the system functions and have reached the conclusion that staying may be more dangerous than leaving. Why now? Because time changes the meaning of service. In the first months of a war, people can endure confusion. They tell themselves the chaos is temporary. They hope the next operation will be planned better. They think replacements will improve, supplies will arrive, and senior leaders will learn. But if month after month brings the same failures, hope turns into math. Officers begin to measure their future and probabilities. How many assaults has my unit survived? How many trained men are left? How many replacements can actually fight? How many bad orders came from above? How many peers were blamed for missions that never had a real chance? How many times did higher command hide the truth, exaggerate success, or punish honest reporting? When those questions pile up, loyalty stops feeling like honor and starts feeling like exposure. A man who once accepted risk as part of his profession may decide he is no longer serving an institution. He is simply being consumed by one. The first major force pushing officers toward desertion is raw casualty exposure. Frontline officers in repeated assault sectors do not experience war as an abstract national mission. They experience it as an endless cycle of men dying under commands that change little and improve less. They meet replacement troops who arrive with almost no training. They learn names on Monday and write condolence paperwork on Thursday. They send understrength platoons toward defended positions and watch the same outcome repeat. Then they receive new men, often older, younger, sicker, less prepared, less confident, and they are told to do it again. The psychological damage here is not just grief, it is the crushing feeling of predictability. Human beings can endure a great deal when they believe sacrifice leads somewhere. They break much faster when they think the system is feeding lives into a machine that has stopped learning. An officer who sees 3 or 4 waves of replacements disappear under nearly identical conditions does not just fear death. He begins to fear meaninglessness. That fear is powerful, and it spreads. The second force is the Russian military culture of downward blame. In every military, people are judged on results. That is normal. But what matters is whether the institution can tell the difference between failure caused by bad leadership below and failure caused by impossible conditions above. Reports from this war suggest that distinction has often collapsed. If an assault fails, the officer closest to the failure becomes the easiest target. It does not matter if his company was under strength. It does not matter if artillery support was late, drones were missing, maps were wrong, or the objective itself was unrealistic. The pressure flows downward. The punishment flows downward. The shame flows downward. Officers see colleagues removed, investigated, humiliated, or threatened for not achieving results that were never realistic. Once that becomes common knowledge, the calculation changes. Staying loyal does not protect you. Following orders does not protect you. Even success may not protect you, because tomorrow brings another mission under the same broken conditions. Fear of death is one thing. Fear of being blamed before you die is another. Then there is the deeper issue. the one that matters more than any single failed attack. The unwritten bargain between an army and its officers starts to fail. Every career officer accepts risk. That is built into the job. But in return, the institution is supposed to give something back. Competent leadership, serious training, clear missions, honest evaluations, equipment that roughly matches the task, a real effort to protect people from pointless waste. And above all, some sense that sacrifice serves a coherent goal. When officers stop seeing those things, obedience changes character. It is no longer the hard discipline of a professional force. It becomes a survival ritual inside a system that does not seem to care whether they return. That is when desertion becomes more than a discipline problem. It becomes a sign that the bond holding the institution together has weakened. Once that bond is damaged, threats alone cannot fully restore it. Fear can force bodies back into position. It cannot recreate belief. The goal is exit, but the more damaging form is quieter. An officer stays inside the system on paper while pulling himself away from its most dangerous moments. He is technically present. He signs what must be signed. He appears in reports. Yet, when the mission reaches the point where leadership matters most, he is elsewhere. He is too far back, too hard to reach, too late to respond, or suddenly unavailable. This is not full desertion in the legal sense, but in combat effect, it can be just as destructive. The unit has a commander in the roster and no commander in the crisis. At this point, quick favor, if this breakdown is helping you see the war in a new way, hit like, subscribe before the next analysis lands, and send this video to one friend who follows the headlines but misses the structure underneath them. Imagine what that does to the soldiers beneath him. Enlisted men can survive fear if they trust leadership. But when troops start suspecting that officers are hiding, delaying, lying, or disappearing at the key moment, morale falls through the floor. Cynicism replaces discipline. Rumors move faster than commands. Soldiers stop asking, "Can we win this position?" and start asking, "Who is trying to save himself this time?" That shift matters because combat power is not just weapons and manpower. It is also confidence. It is the belief that the chain of command, however flawed, still means something when lives are at stake. Once that belief begins to die, unit cohesion decays from below at the same time, command authority decays from above. That is how whole formations become hollow without immediately collapsing. It assumes the officer is making an ordinary risk calculation. It assumes the fear of prison or prosecution is greater than the fear of staying in service. For some people, that might be true. But for an officer who believes the next rotation may end in death, permanent injury, or public blame for another impossible mission, harsher punishment may not change the decision. In some cases, it can even confirm the officer's belief that the institution has nothing left to offer except coercion. When a system responds to shattered trust with pure force, it may temporarily slow the exits. It rarely repairs the reason the exits began. When that system works, leadership can at least try to correct mistakes. When it breaks, bad news gets buried, success gets inflated, and commanders make decisions inside a fantasy. Many reports about the Russian war effort have described exactly that kind of distortion. Numbers polished for higher headquarters, progress overstated, losses obscured, readiness exaggerated. If that culture is strong, then officer desertion becomes not just a moral crisis, but an invisible one. Superiors may not fully understand why their officers are leaving because the same culture that encouraged false battlefield reporting also discourages honest reporting about morale, fear, breakdown, and hopelessness. The institution loses the ability to see itself clearly, and an army that cannot describe its own internal damage will struggle to stop it. This is where the issue moves from private despair to public battlefield effect. Experienced officers are not interchangeable parts. A unit led by veterans behaves differently from a unit led by the panicked or the unprepared. It loses judgment. It loses the small practical knowledge that keeps men alive under pressure. What remains is structure without skill, orders without adaptation, movement without coordination. And because combat is unforgiving, even small losses in leadership quality can produce large losses in performance. An attack stalls faster, a defense bends sooner, confusion lasts longer, casualties climb. Then the surviving officers absorb even more pressure, which pushes the cycle forward again. Their soldiers can feel it, their superiors exploit it, their enemies detect it. A newly commissioned officer can be brave and hardworking and still lack the field judgment of someone who has survived months of real combat. That gap matters most during chaos, and chaos is exactly what these units face. So even when the military fills empty positions, the underlying problem remains. The box is checked. The name is written. But the capability is not truly restored. On paper, the army replenishes itself. In practice, it may be wearing a thinner version of its former shape. The state can control television. It cannot fully control what spreads through families and veteran circles. When career officers lose faith, that loss of faith leaks into the social environment around the army. It makes recruitment harder. It makes mobilization more fearful. It makes patriotic messaging sound thinner because people trust first-hand whispers more than polished speeches. And officers carry special weight in these communities. If a random civilian complains, the state can dismiss him. If a trained officer acts like he no longer believes, people pay attention. Even silence becomes evidence. Even avoidance becomes testimony. In wars of attrition, that quiet social corrosion matters more with each passing month. Men will endure hardship. What they struggle to endure is the feeling that hardship is being distributed according to status, connections, or political value, rather than operational need. Once that perception settles in, the officer is not just angry at the enemy, he is angry at his own institution. Yet systems built on fear and image management rarely do that well. They often choose the opposite. They push harder, punish more, and demand optimism from below. In the short run, that can produce movement. Men obey, units attack. Reports look acceptable, but the hidden cost keeps rising. Experienced officers burn out. Honest ones are sidelined. Risk takers learn that initiative is dangerous if it exposes failure. Career survival starts to depend less on competence and more on telling superiors what they want to hear. At that point, the Army is not just losing officers to desertion. It is also losing the kind of officers most capable of fixing the problem. History gives a warning here. Armies rarely collapse in one dramatic moment first. More often, they hollow out. The uniforms remain. The flags remain. The headquarters issue confident statements. Maps still show lines. Trains still bring replacements. But inside, something essential weakens. Orders travel slower. Truth travels shorter. Initiative disappears. Middle leaders stop taking ownership. Men perform loyalty outwardly and detach inwardly. Then a shock comes, a failed offensive, a surprise breach, a logistics panic, a chain of rapid surrenders, and outsiders say the collapse was sudden. Usually, it was not sudden at all. It was prepared quietly by months or years of internal erosion. That is why officer desertion matters. It is not always the collapse itself. It is often a warning that the structure holding collapse back is becoming thinner. One small mission for you. If this analysis is changing how you read the war, press like, subscribe, and drop this video into one group chat. That is how careful thinking travels faster than propaganda. The goal is not just to persuade a handful of men to defect. The goal is to widen uncertainty across the command layer. Gather intelligence from those who make contact, and force Russian commanders to spend energy policing their own people. Every officer who starts thinking about exit becomes less mentally available for the mission in front of him. Every rear area checkpoint, loyalty screening, and legal case consumes attention that could have gone to planning or support. This is how an internal weakness becomes an active battlefield asset for the enemy. Even one disillusioned officer can give a much clearer picture of a sector than several low-level prisoners. That means desertion is not only a manpower loss for Russia, it can also become an information gain for Ukraine. The same man who leaves to save himself may, directly or indirectly, help the other side understand how to hit the next weak point. In a war where adaptation matters, that is a serious multiplier. Still, we should be careful. Officer desertion does not guarantee immediate battlefield collapse. Russia remains a large state with deep coercive tools. It can mobilize more people, it can threaten families, it can use prisons, surveillance, propaganda, financial pressure, and elite units to hold parts of the system together. Some officers will stay out of duty. Some will stay out of fear. Some will stay because they still believe. Some will stay because they see no safe alternative. That is why wars can continue long after the moral health of an army has deteriorated. Broken institutions do not always stop fighting. Sometimes they become more brutal precisely because they are broken. They substitute force for trust, quantity for quality, pressure for planning. So the point is not that the Russian army disappears tomorrow. The point is that an army can keep moving while becoming less intelligent, less flexible, less honest, and less able to recover from shocks. That is the danger sign. And because the officer layer sits between state ambition and battlefield execution, weakness. There turns national power into wasted motion. A country can have weapons, money, men, and still fail to convert those things into success if the people responsible for turning plans into action no longer trust the machine they serve. There's also a human truth beneath the strategy. Many of these officers probably did not imagine themselves as deserters. They likely imagined themselves as professionals, men who could endure hardship, protect their subordinates, complete the mission, and retire with honor. That matters, because the road to desertion often begins not in cowardice, but in disillusionment. A man does not have to become morally pure to reach a breaking point. He only has to conclude that the system above him is careless with lives, dishonest about results, and ready to punish him for its own failures. Once he crosses that line internally, the uniform can remain on his body while loyalty is already gone. And when enough officers reach that mental point, the institution becomes vulnerable in a way that no parade can hide. Its members are still inside it, but fewer of them are truly holding it up. Once that trust is cracked, every order becomes heavier, every attack becomes riskier, and every defeat becomes harder to contain. An army does not fall apart only when the enemy breaks its lines. Sometimes it falls apart when its own leaders stop believing the lines are worth holding. And if that process is spreading through the Russian officer corps, then the most important battle is no longer only over territory. It is over whether the institution can keep its own core from collapsing under the weight of the war it chose